This afternoon, we are pleased to have a tag team of intellectual firepower from Winston and Barbara Elliot. First, we're going to hear from Winston Elliot. He is the president of the Free Enterprise Institute, which is dedicated to promoting the ideals of a free and virtuous society by teaching the principles of free markets, limited government, the Christian roots of the American founding, and an enduring moral order. Prior to joining the Free Enterprise Institute, Mr. Elliot had served on the Institute's Board of Advisory Trustees since 1984. In 1983, he founded Elliot and Kraft Corporation and served as the president of this computer services company until it was sold in 1991. Mr. Elliot earned his bachelor's degree in history from Washington College in 1982. And in 1991, he was awarded a Master's of Business Administration with honors from the University of Houston. He's currently completing his master's degree in theology from the University of St. Thomas School of Theology in Houston. Will you please welcome Mr. Winston Elliot?
Thanks. Thank you. All right, we're all ready. We've had lunch. We're calm, cool, and collected and know what we're doing, or at least can fake a reasonable facsimile. Very good. That's what it takes in business. A great civilization is not conquered from without until it has been destroyed itself from within. The essential cause of Rome's decline lay in her people, her morals, her class struggle, her failing trade, her bureaucratic despotism, her stifling taxes, and her all-consuming wars. These are the words of Will Durant, a historian who wrote a wonderful history of the civilization. This is from the particular book Caesar and Christ, where he's talking about the Roman Empire. And if you listen to that, you might find some parallels to, or see some parallels to our current situation. Again, the essential cause of the decline for Rome lay in her people, her morals, her class struggle, her stifling taxes, her consuming wars. And I know we're here for the Freedom Seminar, and I'm going to talk some about freedom, but I'm also going to talk about order. I'm going to attempt to open a dialogue that hopefully we can carry on in the question and answer period. A dialogue on order, freedom, and I hope the place of conservatism in guiding us through the tension between order and freedom. And I'm hoping that we may also open our minds and bring us to the question of what is a common understanding of these terms, order and freedom. Perhaps our time together will leave us with more questions than answers. I think that's good, because I think the right questions often lead us towards wisdom, and having answers often stops us from pursuing further. So we might have a few answers, but hopefully we'll have more questions than answers by the time we're done. I intend to share with you also, in the time we're together, the thoughts of some men and women who've given a great deal of time and effort and serious seeking of understanding to the questions of order and freedom. And I'm hoping that together we can have a common experience where it's something like, hopefully you've attended a lecture or been part of a conversation where important ideas are being discussed, and you realize that all of us coming to the same conclusion is not the highest goal. It's not the greatest success we can strive for together, but instead that if we can seek to draw near in our understanding of truth, that should be our goal. And we may not agree on what it is, but we can agree on the value of the pursuit. So we'll have many questions. We're going to remember to think. And I say that not because you don't think, of course, but because in our age, it's sometimes difficult to think. It's a loud age. It's an age with lots of noise. It's an age where some of you, I promise you, because I've done the same thing, are going to check your email, your text messages, or get a voicemail that will interrupt your thought, your focus, your attention during the time we're together. And this happens to us every day, and it doesn't just happen in the classroom. It happens in the business office. It happens in the conference room. I've seen it happen in the boardroom. I've seen board members answering emails during board meetings. These are very successful guys who should know better. But that's the age we live in. It's a difficult age to stop and think. So let's see if we can take the hours we have this afternoon, not hours with me, I mean for the rest of the afternoon, and just try to put the rest of the world out of our mind and see if we can focus on where we are. I used to run a company where we had a lot of people who were very A-type personalities. We were all very money-driven, and that meant we were hustling all the time. And I used to have to tell people who seemed to be in the next meeting while they were still in the meeting with me, be where you are. You are here. What's happening tonight or tomorrow will happen tonight or tomorrow. But what's happening now, you cannot recover if when you leave here you don't remember what we did. So be where you are now. And always, when I talk about remembering to think, part of the reason for that is today we also seem to be in an age where we want followers. Do you want, I don't know that I want you to understand what I'm saying as long as you accept it and are willing to make a contribution or sign up for my campaign or buy my product. That's the most valuable question. But for at least the next hour or so, let's try, instead of being followers or having the feeling that we're being pushed to be followers, hopefully, that we're students. Students who are trying to understand and students who are trying to draw nearer to what I think are the transcendents, the true, the good, and the beautiful. So if we can do that, if we can also become students of the Logos, of the Word, I think we have an opportunity to remember that most of what you're addressing this weekend are questions that are very complex, and that you're not seeking simple answers to complex questions. You recognize that subtlety and shading is not just the words of a politician trying to put something by you. It's actually the fact that it's not always easy to understand what's going on, or to pick the right policies, or to make the right business decision morally, ethically, also make a profit, be concerned about your employees and your stockholders and your banker, because they have different needs. It's a complex world. So we're going to deal with some complex questions, and we're going to leave a lot of this open-ended, and hopefully we'll get a chance to discuss it more in the Q&A. To begin, I want to spend a few minutes with the master of seeking wisdom through dialogue, Plato's Socrates. The great historian Eric Voegelin wrote a wonderful work, his magnum opus, called Order in History. And in that, he tried to search, really from the beginning of recorded history, to find where is the place of order? Where does order develop? How does it develop through time? And in the third volume of his work, it's entitled Plato and Aristotle, he gives us insights into Socrates' search for truth. I say this, of course, as you all know, I'm assuming that Socrates didn't actually write things down. He taught. Plato told Socrates' story. So sometimes the scholars like to fight over whether we're listening to Socrates' words, Plato's fine-tuning of Socrates' words, and the answer is that's a complex question that we're not going to answer today. So I often say, according to Plato's Socrates, and then I'll let the scholars fight it out. In the Apology, and more explicitly in the Gorgias, Socrates is the condemned. He's on trial. And he has to assume the title of defender of justice and confront what he believes to be both the knowing and unknowing devotees of injustice who confront him, who want to condemn him, who want him to stop teaching in Athens, who think he's a bad influence, especially on the young in Athens. And they're concerned that he's undermining the society, and they're concerned that he's undermining the profits in the marketplace by causing these often wealthy young men to stop doing their business and start thinking about truth all the time. And he likes to question, in particular, the wealthy and successful. Now, what he's hoping is that he's going to find among them those that are wise and wiser than himself. If you remember the story, his friend goes to the oracle and says, "Who's the wisest of them all?" And she says, "Well, Socrates is." And his friend goes to tell Socrates that, and Socrates says, "Oh, no, that can't be so. I don't believe it. I don't know very much. I'm not sure I know anything." And so he proceeds to question the most successful politicians and noble family members and this kind of thing about the meaning of truth and wisdom and nature. And unfortunately, they think they know, and he finds by the time they're done that they don't know. So he's still trying to find this who is the wisest, because he's not sure the oracle might have been playing with him a little bit. Well, now he's on trial. And so he's defending himself, but he's making here a very important point about the purpose of dialogue, the purpose of discussion. With some of the things we do, we say the purpose of seminar, because when we get together in seminar, we do a similar Socratic discussion. And he says, quote, he's talking to his opponent in this discussion about his guilt or innocence. I take it that you, like me, have experienced many discussions, and that you have observed this sort of thing about them. It's not easy for the participants to define jointly what they're undertaking to discuss. And so, having learned from and taught each other, to conclude the session. In other words, they keep talking, but they don't understand each other. They don't have a common understanding of the words they're using, and so they can't finish. He says instead, he goes on to say, instead, if they're disputing some point, one maintains that the other isn't right or isn't clear, and they get irritated, each thinking the other is speaking out of spite. They become eager to win instead of investigating the subject under discussion. So I'm afraid to pursue my examination of you, for fear that you should take me to be speaking with eagerness to win against you, rather than to have our subject become clear. Now, if we think about a lot of the public forums that we witness in our culture today, presidential debates, talking heads on television or voices on the radio, how often does it sound like they're really open-mindedly trying to understand each other's position, draw closer to a better solution, a better understanding of the problem, a clearer perception of the problem? And how often do we think either they're just trying to score points, what we used to call debate points, and we don't care about the truth of the question, we just want to look good, or we want to be entertaining. I mean, this is whether it's Fox News or MSNBC or whatever it is, well, there's a reason that they use the speakers that they do, and the reason that they allow each other to talk over top of one another. Normally, you could question, would we allow the participants in a discussion to essentially call each other names, raise our voices, and yell at them and talk at the same time if our goal was understanding? Well, Socrates is saying this is what you do, and he's saying this a long time ago, give or take 400 BC. So this has been going on for thousands of years. Now, he didn't have Fox News and he didn't have CNN, but clearly this isn't a new phenomenon. So to seek not to win, or not just to look good, or not to make the other side look bad, versus to seek understanding. Is it better to appear to have all the answers than to admit we still have mostly questions? That moment, and those of us who work in the business world knows, there's always the moment where we're trying to come up with a solution, and it appears that it's the time to have a solution. The only problem is we don't actually have one. Now, there's two things you can do. You can take a break, you can keep going, or someone in the room almost invariably will offer an inadequate solution that has a good chance of being accepted, even though everyone in the room knows it's inadequate, because it's time to be done. It's time to go home. If we're at a conference, we've got a 1 o'clock tea time. There are reasons we're finishing here, and we're accepting an inadequate answer. Well, we're not going to do that today, hopefully, although we are going to run out of time. Socrates goes on to say that there's an order. Wise men claim that partnership and friendship, orderliness, self-control, and justice hold together heavens and earth, God and men. And this is why we call this universe a world order, my friend, and not an undisciplined world order. This is what he's trying to get across in the conversation. There's an order to things. And it's very important that we understand it, not just try to argue with one another, but that we really seek understanding together. This is his view of social order and also inner order. So when we look at the Republic, Plato's Republic, his masterpiece, most would say, is he actually trying to design an ideal government? Does he really believe we're going to have these guardians who essentially live with pretty much nothing but yet are the philosopher kings of the Republic? Is that what he's trying to do? Or is he trying to demonstrate what an ordered soul looks like using this bigger picture, this Republic, this enterprise, to compare to what an ordered soul looks like on the inside? He goes on to say there is no happiness without personal restraint. And the man who exhibits this restraint is the just man. The tyrant, excuse me, and his legions are naturally afraid of the just man because he poses a threat to the regime. So this is the challenge of Socrates, isn't it? He poses a threat to a regime because he's seeking justice. That makes it clear that he's not sure that the current regime is offering justice, and he's asking too many questions in a public place of important people. We can still get arrested for that, can't we? Matter of fact, if you live in a country like Cuba, or you live in a country like Venezuela, you live in a country like China, if you start asking the question about seeking truth and order and liberty in the public square, it can get very messy. And has. He also presents the argument for seeking a life beyond personal pleasure. He argues that there must be more to life than preservation by stating somewhat ironically, quote, perhaps one who is truly a man should stop thinking about how long he will live. Now this is ironic because, of course, Socrates and his project of going around asking all these questions is essentially what puts him in court in front of a jury of Athenian citizens who, in the end, vote to have him executed. So he's saying, perhaps we should stop thinking about living so long and instead seek the truth. And what happens to men who seek the truth? Well, in Socrates' case, they are executed. Is that okay? Is that good? Is that what we want? We're here to seek the truth. But if they came in and said, for seeking it, we're going to be arrested. If we were going to talk about order and liberty in Cuba right now or in China and use terms that they didn't like, they may well come in and arrest us. Is it valuable enough to do that? Well, Socrates believed it was. The organization of society, according to the writings of Plato, the words of Socrates, is determined by the orderliness of the souls of its citizens. And the central element of the successful Platonic revolution, as Vogelin reminds us, is a radical call for spiritual regeneration. So here to begin with, we see that Socrates reminds us of the need for the thoughtful inquiry, and he also speaks highly of inner order. Okay, so this is a seminar about freedom, but I'm only pretty much talking about order so far. Let's try to see how they relate, and maybe we can use some of the framework, the context that Socrates has given us in our inquiry to keep our minds working in the right direction and asking the right questions. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call inner and outer freedom. In Immanuel Kant's Foundations of the Metaphysics of Morals, he contends that freedom is entirely internal, that our inner power to overcome all the natural laws of psychology and to act originally and independently as rational beings essentially makes up this freedom. Thus for Kant, freedom is inner self-determination. Now what does that mean? Well, if we can determine your own choices and outcomes, this could be somewhat harsh, because if you thought about where you are or maybe where you've been, and you probably are there because of decisions you made, some of which you'd rather you not made, it's somewhat harsh to say, well, that was always your choice, it's always your responsibility. And we live in a time when we don't have responsibility for very much, do we? If we fail at work, it's our bad boss. If we fail in the culture, it's because the culture is decaying and the culture is so bad, and the public education is horrible. And parents today don't spend any time at home, and the toys aren't even educational, and the books are dumbed down. I mean, it's a very difficult time to be successful, isn't it? Are you responsible for that? And by the way, if you do have these problems, if you saw someone, you got some counseling and perhaps took some medication, that would That would take care of it. Wouldn't that remove your responsibility for the bad choices you made? And if you end up in prison because you were molested as a child, which is a terrible, tragic thing, but you killed 12 people and use that as your explanation, that's okay, isn't it? Or you're not responsible for that? Isn't that a lot of what the culture we live in seems to be saying to us? There are lots of reasons for you not to take responsibility for your choices. What happens when you don't take responsibility for your choices? It makes it easier to make ones that you know are going to lead to a bad place. Because you know there will always be a good reason that you can give to your friends, your parents, your boss, why you didn't get it done. You know, with traffic, I had a guy, we used to do big sales meetings for our company, and we'd hire outside speakers to come in and speak. And you know, I've got 50 people sitting there at 7 a.m. for a meeting on a Monday morning, and my speaker isn't there at 7 a.m. He hasn't called at 7 a.m. I'm trying to reach him. This was pre-cell phone. There's no way to reach him. What happened? Well, he got there at 7:40. I'd already sent everybody to work. And his answer was, traffic was bad. Well, you know what? I live in Houston. If you haven't been there, think Chicago on steroids. I mean, you drive 90 miles an hour side by side on a 6-lane freeway, and it sometimes just dead stops. It shouldn't have been a surprise there was traffic. If you're speaking at 7 a.m. and you're the only speaker and there are 40 people sitting there, giving the answer that there was traffic is probably not taking responsibility for your actions. Maybe you should have left an hour earlier, maybe 2 hours. It wasn't his first time in Houston. But isn't that the culture we live in? You know, Professor, I've got to turn this in 2 days late. I got called into an extra shift. What if he said, deadline's a deadline. Any paper turned in after that's an automatic F. Would he be unjust? He might not be very merciful, but would he be just? If it was on the syllabus at the beginning of class, and he said, these are the consequences of the decisions you make, and they are your decisions. Well, it's a harsh world when, according to Immanuel Kant, our freedom actually consists of the choices that we can make on our own. Because that means our freedom is an exercise. It is an opposing of our natural inclinations and desires. In other words, it's when we do not do as we want quite often, but instead do as we ought to do. And according to Kant, that is our freedom. Now, so far, I have not said anything about what the government would or would not let you do, or your parents, or your boss, or the economy, or the oil situation, or the auto situation, or Detroit situation. It's all about inner freedom, your choices. Well, that does sound harsh, in a way, to make you responsible, especially in what I think seems like a soft age. Freedom is preeminently self-control, according to this approach. And yet so often when we use the word freedom, it's followed by a preposition. Freedom of the road, freedom from parental supervision, are you free for coffee? I want to be free to do as I like. And these expressions, we mean we want to be in a situation to take advantage of the world outside of us. Okay? We want to have free choices to go do what we want outside, out here. In this understanding, being for anything means being in the world. In other words, to be receptive and ready for it while being free to choose means being set up for action, ready to go forth and do things. This is the outer freedom, and the outer freedom is a real possibility. And that is, it's the power not over people so much, but over things and circumstances. We can choose where to go. We can choose where to be. We can choose the job to take, the courses to take. That's an outer freedom that affects those things outside of us. And it's a real possibility, real, which draws from the Latin, it is pertaining to things we can touch, move, take, hold. That's real as distinguished from a mere logical possibility. I could give you lots of examples, but I realize we don't have time for them, of things that are logical possibilities, but they're not real possibilities. So we're just talking about this freedom, this outer freedom involves real choices that we can make, things we could actually do. But we're also free simply, and I mean that we're not just free to do something or for something or from something. These negative definitions of freedom, well, you have freedom if no one stops you from doing what you want to do, or no one will hit you or something. Again, simplistic answers to complex questions. But we are in the world, so often to be simply free is very difficult. But really, simply free goes back to our inner freedom. For example, the law can forbid you and does forbid you from saying certain things. The example that you cannot yell fire in a crowded theater because it will cause mayhem and you'll be arrested. And that means that they can actually say you from certain words at certain times. On the other hand, you can think fire all day long. And they can make it illegal. It could be the death penalty for thinking fire. And yet, it can't be enforced. As of yet, we're not in many of the movies that I like where you can know other people's thoughts, which would probably frighten you if you did. But no, so inner freedom we have, because that freedom to make the decisions, to seek the understandings in our interior life, we have that freedom. And this returns us to Kant, who says, who does accept that we're natural beings, that we're subject to the pushing and pulling laws of psychology, to our wants, desires, and our inclinations. Those of us who come from the Judeo-Christian tradition would say, well, man has a fallen nature, that he is broken from the difficulty, the pain, the tragedy of original sin, and thus he is always inclined to do the things he ought not to do because they are easier or they offer pleasure or they're prettier, or at the moment he chooses not to think. And yet Kant says we have the opportunity to overcome. When? When is this? And Kant says there's an essentially moral moment. There's a moral fact. There's an imperative that allows us at any given time, we can lay down the law to ourselves. We can withstand our own nature, deny our own inclinations, and do, once again, not as we want, but as we ought. This freedom, this challenging, marvelous, almost frightening freedom, is an inexplicable fact, and it makes itself known in many ways when we make those moral decisions to get up when we don't want to get up, to not give in to the temptation that we're being tempted by. This human freedom shows as almost a radical reasoning against our nature, because our nature is to take the easier way out. It's to seek the pleasure. It's to seek the material over the spiritual. It's to let the kids sit in the dirty diaper because my game is still on, right? Because now you record it and hit pause, but it used to be if you had to go change the kid, you actually had to miss part of the game. Well, at that moment, you have to make the moral choice. You're a parent. Is that responsible? You're an employee. Is it responsible? There's cash on the table. A customer just paid for some goods. No one will know that the cash didn't go in the register. At that moment, you are free. So you can fight against our natural or broken or fallen nature and make the moral choices. And that perhaps is really at the heart of our human freedom. And this view assigns to rational beings, which hopefully we are, a supernatural root, an infinite responsibility for our actions. This is both, as I said earlier, a little exciting because we have this control over our lives, our interior lives. It's almost without border. And yet, it's also frightening because that whole excuse society, are you taking your meds? Was your mom mean to you that morning? Did you get caught in traffic? Doesn't work anymore. Even if it works out here, in here it does not work. And in here is where you really carry the pain, because the world cannot give you the pain that you can give yourself, because your pain never leaves you. It's inside your head. You hold on to it. So that inner freedom is frightening, but it's also very exciting. I mentioned earlier the historian Will Durant, and he spent 40 years with his wife Ariel writing an 11-volume history of civilization. And they wrote what I would call an integrated history, a history of politics, culture, art, music, literature, and economics, essentially from the beginning of recorded history to the age of Napoleon. And he said this about order. And again, we're talking about freedom, inner and outer. We're talking about order and the tension between order and freedom. Will Durant said this. He said, civilization is social order promoting cultural creation. 4 elements constitute it: economic, political, moral, and the pursuit of knowledge and the arts. It begins where chaos and insecurity end. For when fear is overcome, curiosity and constructiveness are free, and man passes by natural impulse towards the understanding and embellishment of life. Now, if you spent 40 years writing a history of civilization, and people consider it to be pretty thoughtful, perhaps you have something to offer, and he's saying pretty clearly here, we have chaos and insecurity over here, and over here, fear resides. You don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know if you work, that doesn't mean you're going to get paid. If you go to the grocery store, is there going to be food? We have cultures or nations today that have that exact problem. You can go to the grocery store. The problem is there may not be anything on the shelf. Or, frankly, there are bandits who operate, if you want to look at Somalia or parts of Afghanistan and Iraq, to go to the marketplace, to walk down to the corner store to get something to eat or drink or bread or formula for your child is a dangerous proposition. And someone may shoot you not just for your money, which is, I guess, not totally random. We expect that there are people out there who might do such things, but people who are just shooting at the people who go by because they don't like people who live in that area of town. And that part of the world, and sometimes it's part of our world, here, the chaos breeds fear. So instead, Durant is saying, well, to have civilization, to have progress in economics, in politics, in education, in the arts, we have to have order first. For our freedom cannot be based on fear. It has to be based on a rational expectation. The decisions we make can actually become real. And can they become real without order in a state of chaos? No. So order is the foundation of freedom. Now note that Durant says social order he's talking about is part of cultural creation. He says economic, political, moral, and educational. But he also reminds us, again, that order overcomes fear. It allows men to seek understanding and embellishment of life. In her book, Simone Weil wrote a book called The Need for Roots. And she suggests that we would imagine a man traveling in the night without a guide, thinking continually of the direction he wishes to follow. She says this is the image of man, a human being, in search of order. She says such a traveler's way is lit by a great hope. And she tells us that order is the path we follow by which we live with purpose and meaning. Above even food and shelter, she says we must have order. The human condition is insufferable unless we perceive a harmony and order in existence. Thus, order is the first need of all. This brings us back to Kant and his inner freedom, which it seems to me is an order which, applied wisely, could become the foundation of a real freedom. For if a person can live tolerably with himself or with others, he must know order. For if we lack order in the soul and order in society, we dwell, quote, in a land of darkness as darkness itself, as the book of Job puts it, and the shadow of death without any order, where light is as darkness. This does not sound like a good place to be. Our time, Weil wrote, is a time of discovery, very like the disorder of Greece, is a time of disorder, very much like the disorder of Greece in the 5th century before Christ. In her words, quote, it is as though we return to the age of Pythagoras and the sophists, the age when the art of persuasion, whose modern equivalent is advertising slogans, publicity, propaganda meetings, the press, movies, television, took the place of thought and controlled the fate of cities. So we find in the 9th book of Plato's Republic that it reads like a description of contemporary events. Again, we go back to that very first examples with Plato, where it appears that in our political world today, often unfortunately in our educational world, it's more important that I get you to think or do what I want than it is for me to actually increase your understanding of what I want you to do or why. Thus, we can spend $400 or $500 million on political ads that are less than 30 seconds long, where I promise you, and I know this for a fact, that actually much more money and time is spent designing the picture effect, the graphic effect, and the music than the words. So is it more important with that $500 or $600 million worth of ads? I'm thinking of one group, of course, for the last election. It was in the billions. Is it more important that they help us understand their policy so that we can make wise choices? Or is it more important that they move us emotionally? Well, if you're going to spend all your time on the graphics, and they're not charts, and have pretty people having a good time, or sad people, or grandma going over a cliff pushed by someone who doesn't care about her, then it may be that you actually care more about getting me to do what you want than you do about me understanding the reasons why I should choose your position or the position of your opposition. And this lack of interest in the truth is not partisan. It seems to apply to all parties. Not all the time and not all individual candidates all the time, but often. But it's not limited to the world of politics. How many ads do we watch that we think are misleading? Is there a reason this is just a personal picadillo, but the pricing that always ends with $9.99, how often do you find yourself telling someone that you paid $19.99 or $9.99 or whatever the 99 was, instead of saying it's $20 or it's $10? It's psychological. In sales, we know that it's not necessarily the facts that move people to make a purchase. It's what their perception, their emotional response is. There's a reason we shape political ads or product ads in ways that move people's emotions, but may not actually inform them almost at all about the product that they're interested in. And that's the time we're living in. And that's what she's saying. This was 5th century Greece. This is Socrates saying, you guys teach people, you sophists, teach people how to debate. And you teach people, essentially you teach lawyers. You teach people who deal with court cases how to win without knowing or caring about the truth. But you'll win. You will sway the jury and you will win. Is it like that now? Do you think that in law school you spend more time trying to figure out, if you're taking your advocate classes, your classes on how to do better in the courtroom, do you spend more time trying to figure out how to find the truth with your questions and examination of the facts, or do you spend more time trying to figure out how to persuade the jury that your side is right? Well, our time is not very different from Socrates' time. As the historian Russell Kirk has pointed out, as individuals in his civilization, we are like a man without the guide that Vail talked about earlier, a man in the dark looking for a path. That we are in the 21st century groping for order, and we often don't know what it is or where it is, but we know that something's wrong and we don't have it. He goes on to state that the word order is best apprehended by looking at its opposite, disorder. That a disordered existence is confused and miserable existence. For if a society falls into general disorder, its members can cease to exist at all. Again, back to that example of that town in Somalia, or the town in Afghanistan, or the town in Iraq, or you name the country currently in chaos, because there's always some country currently in chaos, where you can't go to the marketplace, you can't go to the well. You certainly couldn't send your kid to school because the chaos is greater than the order. And so Kirk goes on to say the members of society, if they are disordered in the spirit, then the outward order of the Commonwealth itself cannot endure. In other words, if we have a moral and cultural decay, a political decay is only a natural outcome. It is going to happen. It's not something that politics doesn't shape to as great a degree who we are morally, culturally, as the other way around. It's the inner order of us as citizens that creates the outer order in the Commonwealth. So this is where we talk about words, we couple words like law and order. And we say that, I would say they are related, but they're not the same thing. As laws arise out of social order, they're general rules which make it possible for tolerable functioning of an order, but nevertheless an order that is bigger than the laws itself. We call this, when we talk about constitutional law, that there's a constitutional order. Now the constitutional order is not only encapsulated in the document written in 1787, or actually approved in 1787 or 1788. I'm going to get confused now. But so that order is outside of the document itself, and what it is the cultural, political, mental constructs of the people at the time it was constructed that informed it. So they had a way of thinking about constitutional order that made that document understandable. And that we have to understand in order to understand how they thought about the Constitution. So if someone says, well, I'm an originalist, I only go by the words. Well, the words are good, and we should start there. Unfortunately, there's too many legal scholars today who skip the words. We probably should at least start with them. But it is valuable to understand the context of those who not only wrote the document, but those who debated the document in the convention, who then debated it in the state conventions, who then voted in the state conventions, and the people who elected the delegates who went to the state conventions. What were they thinking? That will help us think what they wanted this Constitution to really be, and since we still have it, it would probably be helpful if we understood what the people who gave it to us wanted to give us. So this word order means a systematic and harmonious arrangement, whether it's in our character or in our commonwealth, and it signifies the performance of certain duties and the enjoyment of certain rights. Now, we live in a rights-based society where we like to talk about our rights all the time. I have the right to speak. I have the right to be in this class. I have the right to wear what I want. There's one challenge to understanding rights. If you have a right, someone has a corresponding duty. And if you're only talking about your right, then you only understand half of the relationship of you to your right. So if you say, I have a right to sit in this class, then someone has a duty to provide that classroom for you. For your right cannot be enforced if there is no classroom. And is it a right if it's not possible to enforce it? Corresponding duty. Well, I have a right to have a job that provides a living for me. I have a right not to live on the street. Well, I'm not saying you do or you don't, but what I am saying is that if you have a right not to live on the street or to have a house or to have a car, to have a job, then someone has the duty to provide you with it. If I say I have a right to be married, then some woman has the duty to be married to me. Now, she's already out there, so I'm fortunate. But we don't get these rights. They don't stand alone. They don't come from nowhere. They must be essentially delivered. So they go together. And if we're going to talk about a right, we always have to be aware and be willing to discuss and hopefully offer in our discourse, if we're trying to seek true understanding, that this is the right that I would like to talk to you about today, and here's the corresponding duty that someone has to meet this, to give me the freedom to live out my right, or to give me the place to do it, or the resources to do it. And in our society, we might say you have, again, a right to an education. You have a right to vote. If you have a right to vote, do you have a duty to be informed? I know it's funny. I've watched some of these late-night TV things where they interview someone who just voted, and you've probably seen it because it works both ways. They'll say, oh, you voted for President Obama. Did you know that he's for X, Y, and Z? And of course, they give the main policies of President Obama's opponent, and this person says, yes, that's why I voted for him. Well, of course, the answer is he's actually against everything you just said or the reason you voted for him. So did you not understand the question, or did you actually vote for him without having any understanding of what he does? And both sides have voters who would say such things. So they exercised their right, but did they do their duty? Okay. The roots of order in the United States are old and intricate. These roots give life to us all. We can distinguish two sorts of roots intertwined, and we've talked about it. The roots of a moral order, you can call that order in the soul, and the roots of a civil order, the order of the republic in our case. And we are heirs to an order which comes out of Western civilization, a Western heritage. It offers us things such as ordered liberty, rights and duties, constitutionally limited government, freedom of worship, private property, free markets, civic responsibility. These are part of our order. They're part of our Western heritage. They weren't invented here, contrary to what some American exceptionalists like to say. They were here at our beginnings, which also wasn't in 1776 or 1787, because we had colonial government and freedoms and courts and newspapers and pubs long before 1776 and 1787. And we actually didn't start the Western heritage here in America. Actually, what we got was the result of a cumulative wisdom of over 3,000 years of history. And it would be prudent to sometime remember and to appreciate that we stand on the shoulders of giants, those who came before us, who did the heavy lifting in the areas of economic questions and political questions and moral questions and theology and science and mathematics and astronomy and music. These greats who went before us, whether it be Bach or Beethoven or Pascal, all of these folks offer us a heritage which we did not create, and if we're smart, we can just say thank you. Now, our culture isn't good at that. We should practice that, saying thanks to people who gave us something that we don't even know. So this order, where did it come from? Well, for us, I would contend, and drawing on a number of great historians, that from Jerusalem we were given the order of the soul. From Athens we learned the order of the mind. From Rome we inherited the order of the polity, of the republic, of the political system. From London we learned constitutional order and property rights. And that we took all of these things, rolled them together, and in 1776 and 1787 they came to fruition and became Philadelphia and the Declaration and the Constitution, and here we are. These are our roots. These are where we get to be who we are. Dr. Kirk wrote, "The order which Americans experience is derived from the experience of these four old cities. If our souls are disordered, we fall into abnormality, unable to control our impulses. But if our commonwealth is disordered, we fall into anarchy, every man's hand against one another." And this is what we've managed to avoid, and you need to be aware, many countries have not managed to avoid falling into anarchy at some stage and having riots that involve a great deal of death or political coups or a lack of resources that cause great tragedy. We have been very fortunate. We have this rich history which produced a particular flowering in American soil, this American republic, and that our founding was a historical expression of what I would call ordered liberty, a interaction between freedom and order in a way that allows us to have both, knowing that there's always a tension between the two. And the tension can be as simple as, I have the right to speak, but you don't have the duty to listen. How does that work? Because can my freedom fully be exercised if you won't listen? Well, we try to deal with that. We understand that we're not going to get a simple answer to that question, and so that means if I hire a forum, or if Northwood hires it, and you choose to come, I have the right to speak, you have the right to listen. Now that means someone who comes in who doesn't like this speech does not necessarily have the right to yell or play loud music or bring in a salsa band while I'm speaking. Okay? So there are limitations on his right, and there are limitations on mine, because I cannot stand up here and say slanderous things, for example, without perhaps getting sued. So there's a tension between freedom and responsibility, between order and liberty. This is the ordered liberty that we have in this country. John Adams wrote that freedom is the power to do what one ought to do. Again, notice we're going back to this moral imperative that Kant talks about. Yes, there's freedom, but what do we do with it? It's not just to do anything with. Freedom is not the power to do what one can, but what one ought. And again, Adams is drawing from that well that Kant did. Tocqueville, who wrote, of course, Democracy in America, said that no free communities ever existed without morals. So a close look will show us that democracy and a market economy and the rule of law and these other things that we associate with our republic are actually just mechanisms in which the character of the people are poured. The character of the nation is in the hearts, habits, and minds of the people who live within it. The framers of the early American Republic thought that the good society must be marked by a high degree of justice, order, and freedom. And they believed that a nation that did not maintain the twin virtues of faith and morality could not maintain liberty. Now this is why the questions when we start talking about in political discourse or business ethics, we start talking about what are the moral issues involved in selling this product, of using this particular advertising method, of allowing this person to marry using the state's resources, or to allow these persons to marry using business resources, or to sue them if they refuse to offer them these business resources, are moral and ethical questions. They're not just political, they're not just economic. You can't say, oh, well, I'm just going to decide this on an economic basis. Because maybe your stockholders won't like your ethics, or your voters won't like your ethics. You better be able to explain them and understand them, for the chance of you being able to exercise them without interference is limited if you cannot explain them. So morals, ethics, feed into politics, feed into the market. They cannot be separated. We cannot separate moral questions from the marketplace. We cannot separate moral questions from politics. The question is, how do we deal with them? And ignoring them is like ignoring the traffic in Houston. It may be a reason that you give, but you don't even believe it when you give it, let alone your audience. So we have to challenge ourselves more. Adams went on to write, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And if you've seen some of what we tried to do in other cultures, in Iraq and Afghanistan, for instance, where we've tried to impose our marketplace rules, our governmental rules, our constitutional order, using the terms that we like, and one man, one vote, one woman, one vote, all these things, which we value very much and think we're offering as a gift to other cultures, if the other culture does not have the common understanding of them or appreciation of them that we do, or they approach it differently, whether better or worse, to then imply our rules, our marketplace standards to their culture is probably not going to work. Now you can say it's our fault, you can say it's their fault, but frankly, if you try to impose rules on a society or culture that has no way or doesn't have your common understanding of what those rules mean, when you get results that you're not happy with, to be surprised is to be naive. You do not want to go through the world naive. You don't want to tell your boss, well, I just never imagined that someone would take the cash that I left on the table when I went in the back room. Really? You just never imagined that, ever? You better start getting a better imagination. And it's the same when you say, well, we're going to Afghanistan or Iraq, and we're going to have them use the same political mechanisms that we do because they work for us. And you can say, well, but they're a more tribal culture, and many of them can't read. And illiteracy affects how you handle campaigns and politics. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but it affects how you do it, and we can't force it on them. So we take it further. So order in our republic is supported by faith and virtue, and it's the product of more than 3,000 years of human striving. Without a high degree of private moral order, as I said, among the American people, the rule of law could not have given us, or could not have prevailed in the way it has in this country. So order is, again, the first need of the soul, for it is not possible to love what we ought to love unless we recognize some principles of order by which to govern ourselves. Order is, again, the first need of the Commonwealth. About half a century ago, or actually now it's probably closer to 80 years ago, perceiving a widespread disintegration of private and public order, William Butler Yeats, the poet, wrote of what would become of the torment of the modern world. He said in his poem, "Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." Again, he could have been writing of Socrates' time, according to Socrates, or he could be writing of the time that Simone Weil was writing, which was during World War II, as someone who was born a Jew and became a Christian, and who lived in occupied France for a while, and who suffered and died while eating a starvation diet, trying to be sympathetic to those who were being treated so in her country. It seems that chaos was loose and that the best lacked all conviction. In other words, we were so busy in 1941, 42, 39, 40, 41, making money and enjoying what we were enjoying of a successful economy in our country that we forgot to look around and see that great injustice was being done. And in the end, it became not only a problem for those across large bodies of water, but here. And our men and women died to fight that problem. And that's because we waited too long, perhaps. You could make that argument. And that in this case, the worst, whether it was the communists or the Nazis or the fascists, were full of passionate conviction while the rest of us stayed home. We were busy. We had things to do. We had obligations to our family, which truly are obligations to our family, but did we perhaps in that case, in that time, have a civic duty to be aware of the project, of the agenda of these groups who seem to be taking control of large amounts of weapons and people and space? And perhaps we waited too long. In the Roman Republic, in the years, basically when the Roman Republic was falling, Cicero wrote of the disordered situation around him, and he said, "Long before our time, the customs of our ancestors molded admirable men, and in turn these eminent men upheld the ways and institutions of our forebears. Our age, however, has inherited the Republic as if it were some beautiful painting of bygone ages, its colors already fading through great antiquity, and not only has our time neglected to freshen the colors of the picture, but we have failed to preserve its form and its outline." So Cicero, like Plato before him, understood that the problem of order is both personal and social. And in Cicero's case, he was saying that Roman men and Roman justice had declined together. So yes, morals and education and what's going on in the churches matter to the culture. Not just politics and not just profit. Not only those things, although those things do matter. That's the reason why Cicero and Plato remain relevant as President Obama or Mitt Romney or some senator or Ronald Reagan for people of my generation. They matter quite a bit, but they are not everything and they don't know all time. So we have to go to the greatest minds, the greatest works, and work them. It's not always easy. But we do have many questions we need to address. We have lots of answers, many of which can't be good, for many of them contradict one another, and if we accept contradicting answers, then we know we're going to get contradicting outcomes. We have to try to figure out what's good, but it's not easy. It's complex, and frankly, it's not going to be answered by a bumper sticker or a 30-minute or a 30-second commercial or a talking head on Fox News yelling at some other talking head on Fox News calling somebody from MSNBC an idiot. This is probably not going to gain us greater truth or understanding or wisdom. So, no order is perfect. Man himself is imperfect. So we're not going to make it to utopia. I assume you guys watch the Matrix movies. I really like the Matrix movies. Do you remember at one point, I think it's the last movie, the architect, the cool-looking guy in the suit with the white hair and the white beard, I think he had an English accent, which always makes you sound smarter. When I'm born again, I want to be born with an English accent because you're smarter and more interesting no matter who you are. And he does a wonderful job, I think, in that movie. Remember, he's sitting in that chair, and all the screens are around him, and there's all these pictures of Neon and all those Neo and all these folks. It's kind of his life and all the lives that are going on in the Matrix. And he starts to tell Neo, well, you realize I designed this. He's really a software program, we're led to believe. I designed this whole system. So while these people are sitting in, remember those little chambers where they're plugged in, it's really not very attractive, and they're naked and immersed in some fluid that looks nasty. They're really batteries. Remember they call them like copper tops, like, what is it, not Ever Ready, the other one, battery, Duracell. It used to be called copper tops because of the brown top on the battery. And essentially they treat human beings as batteries to power the world that has lost power because of resources and destruction and environmental mishandling. And the programs, the Matrix, once creates the Matrix so that we can exist in it to be batteries for their system. And so, but we found we had to keep your minds alive, essentially, or you wouldn't live physically. That's something to think about. So what happened? So we designed, essentially right now, I don't remember what he says, this is the 5th or 6th generation of the Matrix, because we learned about you as we made this, because we want to keep you alive. He says, in the first generation, we gave you everything you wanted. We made the images that flow through your mind while you're plugged into these lines, charging our system. We made your life perfect. You got the right job and the right woman and the right education and the right children, and the world was wonderful. And we found that your brain started shutting down and you died. You couldn't handle utopia. It didn't matter if it was the Matrix or Thomas More's utopia, or the utopia of the left or the utopia of the right, the capitalist utopia or the communist utopia. We can't handle it, at least according to the architect in the Matrix. So there is this question of, we're not going to have this utopia, so the people who offer us the utopian solutions probably are offering something that they cannot actually give you. So here we are. We have roots, we have an order, we have an inner freedom, we have an outer freedom. What do? Well, for my work, we try to offer what I call a conservatism. We have a journal called The Imaginative Conservative, and so we try to offer an understanding of order and liberty, of inner freedom and outer freedom, and the tension between all of these things. We try to offer an understanding of that approaches it in a way to preserve that is the best part of what we've been given, our Western heritage, as there are parts that have worked very well, there are parts that have not. We have to preserve and pass on, and sometimes restore those things that are most good, most valuable, most true, most wise, most beautiful. And then we have to also be open to change, to take into account the fact that we have jet planes and the people who gave us these great gifts didn't, and it may make a difference in how we should do things, or television, or someday the Matrix. I hope not. So this is what we offer. And for me, when I'm speaking of conservatism, it doesn't just apply in the political arena. It has a much broader message. And when I talk about what we want to conserve, I'd like to, and often do, talk about that we are to conserve and preserve the best, as I said before, the true, the good, and the beautiful. I draw a lot of inspiration from Russell Kirk, who's from Acosta, Michigan. He said, from the hour I began to reason, and possibly from the hour I began to feel, I have been a conservative. I am a conservative, quite possibly because I'm on the losing side. Well, I often think so. He said, yet out of curious perversity, I had rather lose with Socrates than win with Lenin. I like that. I like the fact that he's basically saying, I was a conservative out of the womb. Now, I think that's cool. I was not. Many of us don't. Most of us don't have that kind of situation where we have an understanding, a set of principles that guide us from the beginning of our memories. I hope that a conservatism that preserves, that restores, that thinks, that has an understanding of the true, the good, and the beautiful, that has an understanding of the bigger picture, the questions we should be asking. I hope it's the wave of the future. I hope it's a genuine revival of an intelligent interest in old liberties and duties to go along with our rights. I hope that it's not just about shopping and profit and business, but it's also about a conservatism of imagination that is generous and charitable. And I hope it will not push a clumsy, muddling through compromise set of principles to our national problems, and instead be illuminated by the wisdom of our ancestors and inspired by the revived consciousness of the moral nature of our society. Now, Dr. Kirk, who wrote 32 books and was described by Time and Newsweek as the most influential American conservative of his time, first book, well, it's his second book, which came out in 1953, The Conservative Mind, which shaped the early conservative intellectual movement, which influenced so much of what we now think of as being conservative in terms of politics and economics. He gave us kind of a genealogy and understanding of where conservative thought came from, and thus, if you know where you came from, you might have a chance of knowing where you're going. When I came here, I did probably what a lot of you did when you rent cars now. You used to rent the Ever Guide or something, those portable in a big bag GPS things. They're like this big, and you have to pay like $30 a day to rent it. I assume they're not hardly renting any anymore now, because you hold your phone up and you're good to go. You don't have, why would you pay somebody $20 or $30 a day? Well, there is one reason, which you might want to know, which is those GPS systems you rent actually use satellite and not the cell network. And so areas where you lose cell, you don't lose satellite. And if you've been out in the middle of nowhere following your phone and it loses service, you'll know that the satellite is not a bad thing. Okay, it's something you might want to have. But really, even that phone that's so smart, that's so convenient and relatively so inexpensive to guide you all over the world, and it will draw you maps to walk, ride a bus, drive your car, all over the world. That same cell, the first thing it does is ask you your current location and where you want to go. And if you don't know where you are and you don't know where you want to go, it can't help you. Well, as a nation, as a young person seeking a career, whether it be in business or politics or the arts or music or ministry, if you don't know where you are, you don't know your roots, you don't know who you are, and you haven't taken time to know thyself, as Socrates said, or you don't have a plan or a concept of where you're going and why you'd want to go there, it's very difficult for any map to work for you. My answer to some of my staff when I would ask them what their goals were was simply, okay, if you don't have any, well, then it doesn't matter what you do here, because if you have no goal, any plan will do. That doesn't sound very promising, does it? I mean, shouldn't you have some idea where you want to go as a nation, as a church, as a people, as an educational institution, as a student? And then, frankly, if I hire staff and they have no idea where they're going, I'm either anticipating that they're just young and they are trying to figure it out, and you want to send those people to some seminars, some conferences, get them to read some good books, tell them to read Peter Drucker, understand what an executive is supposed to be, so that you can say, you know what you want to become. Then we can start giving you a career plan or a family plan or an educational plan that fits. But until you figure that out, no plan is going to be adequate for you. Or you're just going to do what most people do. You're going to accept someone else's plan for your life. Your parents, your professors, your employers, your wife, your husband, the IRS, the Army, whoever it is, all those things might be okay, but wouldn't it be better for you to have your plan? And so Kirkus gave us essentially an understanding of who we are as those who are to preserve the best and pass that on to the next generation. Okay. I've given you a lot of thoughts, and we've talked about inner order and outer order and freedom and liberty and how to preserve them and how to think about them and how to avoid simple answers to complex questions and never tell somebody you paid $9.99 for something. Some of these are more valuable than others, I think. But now we have a chance to talk about it. So let me just close up by giving what I think might be a helpful project to think about, or at least a term that it's worth investigating. If I can find it in my notes. The essential question that every person should ask is, what is the object of human life? As we come close to answering this question for the individual, we can apply that answer more broadly to our family, to our communities, to our states, and to the Republic. I think Dr. Kirk answers the question well when he says, at the back of every discussion of the good society lies this question: what is the object of human life? The enlightened conservative does not believe that the end or aim of life is competition or success or enjoyment or longevity or power or possessions. He believes instead that the object of life is love. He knows that the just and ordered society is that in which love governs us so far as love ever can reign in this world of sorrows. And he knows that the anarchical or the tyrannical society is that in which love lies corrupt. He has learned that love is the source of all being and that hell itself is ordained by love. He understands that death, when we have finished the part that was assigned to us, is the reward of love. And he apprehends the truth that the greatest happiness ever granted to man is the privilege of being happy at the hour of his death. So I hope that this raises some questions. And we can see where wisdom and truth and love and beauty are always to be found. We can go to at least one book, in my view, for that. And so I'm going to close right now with these words, what some of my friends call the Christian Humanist Manifesto, but I believe it's taken as a credo for those of us who are concerned and aware of the created nature of man and committed to respect the dignity of the human person in all thoughts and actions. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is right, whatever is noble, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. These words offer hope to our families, our communities, our republic. They offer us the chance for hope, grace, charity, gratitude, and prayer. And I hope they offer us the chance to exercise our imaginations, our minds, and enjoy all the things that we ought to enjoy. Thank you.